In the lush, remote outskirts of Manus, 52-year-old Joan Garcia's life takes an extraordinary turn when he stumbles upon a peculiar, ugly chick deep in the heart of the Amazon rainforest. 2 weeks later, that seemingly insignificant discovery will not only redefine his purpose in life, but also reignite hope for an entire species thought lost to the wild. The small farmhouse on the edge of Manus was now surrounded by a sea of flashing lights, police cars, and even news vans, their spotlights slicing through the darkness of the Amazon night. Joan Garcia, a weathered farmer in his 50s, stood frozen, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and awe. "Senor Garcia," a reporter called out, shoving a microphone toward his face. "Is it true? Did you find a—" Before he could finish, a sound pierced the air, unlike anything the crowd had ever heard. The melody was pure, hauntingly beautiful, as if it had drifted in from another world. The crowd fell silent. All eyes turned to the small barn behind Joan's house. Joan took a deep breath, his mind spinning as he tried to understand how his life had changed so drastically in just 2 short weeks. How had he gone from a struggling farmer to this? Just 2 weeks ago, the sweltering heat of the Brazilian summer beat down on his weathered face as he trudged along a narrow trail through the dense Amazon rainforest. At 52, his once broad shoulders now slumped from years spent tilling the harsh Amazonian soil. His calloused hands, cracked and stained with earth, swayed wearily at his sides as he made his way home after another exhausting day of foraging for rare medicinal plants to help supplement his meager farm income. Lost in his gloomy thoughts, Joan almost missed the faint noise cutting through the usual forest sounds. He stopped, tilting his head, listening closely. There it was again, a weak, pitiful cheeping from somewhere in the underbrush. Curious, Joan scanned the dense greenery, his eyes settling on a small, shivering lump of flesh huddled beneath a large, waxy leaf. "What in the world?" Joan muttered, crouching down for a better look. What he saw made him instinctively recoil, and if he was honest, it kind of grossed him out. The creature in front of him was unlike anything he'd ever encountered in all his years exploring the rainforest. It was about the size of his fist, with patchy grayish skin that looked too big for its body, hanging in wrinkled folds. Its head was oddly large, with a hooked beak that looked almost cartoonish on its tiny frame. But it was the eyes that truly unsettled Joan, large, bulbous things that seemed to bulge from its skull, giving the creature an alien, almost monstrous appearance. But just as he began to rise, the creature let out another pitiful cry, its bulging eyes locking onto Joan's face. Something in that gaze pulled at his heart. It reminded him of his own struggles, of feeling alone and cast aside in a harsh, unforgiving world. He thought of the countless times he'd faced hardship, the nights he'd gone to bed hungry, the days he'd worked until his hands bled, all just to survive in this brutal environment. With a sigh that was equal parts resignation and compassion, Joan gently scooped the creature into his weathered hands. "All right, little one," he murmured in Portuguese. "Let's get you home and see what we can do for you. Maybe you and I can face this world together." As he carried the creature back to his modest farmhouse, Joan couldn't shake the feeling that he was making a mistake. He had so little, barely enough to feed himself, let alone some strange animal that might not even survive the night. But there was something about the creature's vulnerability that stirred something deep inside him. It awakened memories of his own childhood, of being an orphan, struggling to survive alone on the streets of Manus, before an old farmer had taken him in and offered him a second chance at life. The journey back to his small farm took longer than usual, as Joan carefully made his way through the underbrush, cradling the fragile creature against his chest. As he walked, he found himself speaking softly to his new companion, a habit he'd developed over years of solitude. As Joan approached his home, a strange mix of emotions washed over him. On one hand, the familiar sight of his farm filled him with pride. This place was his, earned through years of back-breaking work and stubborn willpower. On the other hand, he couldn't help but feel a flicker of shame at how humble it all was, especially now that he had a guest, however strange and unexpected. "Well, little one," he said, pausing at the front door, "it's not much, but it's home. Let's get you inside and figure out what you need." Joan pushed open the creaky wooden door and stepped into the dimly lit interior of his house. The main room served as both living area and kitchen, with a small wood-burning stove in one corner and a worn but clean sofa against the opposite wall. A single bare bulb hung from the ceiling, casting a weak yellow glow over the sparse furnishings. Moving to the kitchen area, Joan gently placed the creature on the rough wooden table. Under better light, he could now see that, despite its bizarre appearance, the little being did somewhat resemble a bird, or at least what a bird might look like if it had been turned inside out and then partially inflated. The creature chirped again, its oversized eyes fixed on him with an unsettling intensity. Joan couldn't help but chuckle, despite his concerns. "Well, you're definitely not winning any beauty contests," he said. "But then again, neither am I these days." His mind raced as he tried to figure out his next steps. He'd raised chickens before, sure, but this was no ordinary farm bird. What did it eat? How should he care for it? And perhaps most importantly, was it even safe to keep in the house? As if in answer to his silent questions, the chick let out another feeble cry, somehow managing to look even more pitiful than before. Joan felt his resolve solidify. Beauty contest or not, this tiny creature needed help, and he wasn't going to turn his back on it. With that, he set about making a temporary home for his new guest. He found an old wooden crate and lined it with soft rags to create a warm little nest. Then he mixed a simple meal, mashed fruit, soaked seeds, and a bit of scrambled egg from his own chickens. It wasn't gourmet, but it was the best he could offer with what he had. As night fell and Joan got ready for bed, he couldn't shake the feeling that his life had shifted somehow. That morning he had entered the forest as a solitary farmer, struggling to make ends meet. Now he was ending the day as, what? A caretaker? A guardian? A friend to this strange, ugly little creature? Whatever it was, Joan knew one thing. His life would never be quite the same again. As he drifted off to sleep, lulled by the familiar nighttime sounds of the rainforest and the soft cheeping of his new companion, Joan couldn't help but wonder what the coming days might bring. By the end of the first week, Joan found himself becoming more and more attached to his odd little ward. He had even taken to calling it feio, Portuguese for ugly. It was a name that, over time, became more affectionate than descriptive. It was during the second week that the truly miraculous transformation began. Joan woke one morning to find a dusting of colorful down covering Foo's once bare skin. At first he thought the dim light of dawn was playing tricks on his eyes, but as he leaned in for a closer look, there was no denying it. Foo was finally growing feathers. Over the next few days, the transformation sped up, leaving Joan in awe. Vibrant feathers began to sprout all across Foo's body, forming a dazzling display of colors that shimmered and shifted in the light, blues as deep as the Amazon River, reds as brilliant as a setting sun, and greens that perfectly mirrored the lush canopy of the rainforest. Every day, new shades emerged, turning Foo into a living rainbow. By the 10th day, Joan could hardly believe this was the same creature he'd found trembling beneath a leaf in the forest. Foo had nearly tripled in size, and his once awkward body had become sleek and elegant. The oversized beak that once looked cartoonish now appeared powerful and noble, perfectly built for cracking even the toughest rainforest nuts and seeds. But it was Foo's eyes that changed the most. The bulging, alien-like orbs that had once unsettled Joan were now clear, expressive eyes, large and intelligent, sparkling with something that felt almost human. When Fu looked at him now, Joan felt as if he were being seen not just by a bird, but by a wise old friend. "Mao," Joan whispered on the morning of the 14th day, the realization hitting him like a lightning bolt. "You're a Mao, and not just any Mao. You must be one of the rare ones I've heard about, the ones worth more than my entire farm." As if to confirm Joan's revelation, Fu suddenly spread his wings wide for the first time, revealing a breathtaking span of nearly 1.5 meters. The motion sent a ripple of color through his feathers, so brilliant, so fluid, that it nearly brought tears to Joan's eyes. Then the weight of the situation began to settle in. Joan had unknowingly cared for one of the rarest and most valuable birds in the world. Ma'au, like Fu, were protected under international law, and the trade of such creatures was heavily regulated in order to stop the illegal pet market that threatened their survival in the wild. Joan's mind raced. What was he supposed to do now? He couldn't keep Fu. As much as the thought hurt, he knew that a creature this magnificent didn't belong in a farmhouse. It belonged in the wild. But he couldn't just release Fu into the forest either. The Mao had clearly imprinted on him, looking to Joan as both parent and protector. Without proper rehabilitation, Fu wouldn't stand a chance against the countless dangers of the Amazon. As Joan struggled with these thoughts, Fu let out a sound that made his jaw drop. It wasn't a squawk or a chirp, but a clear, melodic note that floated through the air like crystal. Fu tilted his head, seemed to think for a moment, then repeated the sound, this time weaving together a series of tones that formed a hauntingly beautiful melody. Joan stood frozen, hardly daring to breathe, afraid to shatter the spell. He'd heard stories of the musical abilities of Mao before, but nothing like this. The complexity of the melody, the purity of each note. It was beyond anything he'd ever encountered in his decades living in the Amazon. As Fu's song rose to a breathtaking crescendo, Joan made up his mind. He had to report this. A bird this rare, this special, this important. It couldn't be kept a secret. No matter what happened next, he had a responsibility to give Fu the best chance at a full, healthy life in his rightful habitat. With a heavy heart but a clear conscience, Joan reached for his ancient rotary phone, ready to set in motion the events that would change everything. But nothing could have prepared him for the reaction. The moment the news broke, people began flooding to his home. Reporters shouted questions at him, news vans crowded his driveway, and the assembled crowd held its breath, waiting to see what might emerge from the barn. Joan closed his eyes and took a deep breath. In just 2 weeks, his life had changed completely. The ugly, helpless creature he'd rescued from the forest had become something miraculous, something beyond explanation. As the barn door creaked open, Joan braced himself for what was coming. Whatever happened next, he knew. Life would never be the same again. The world was about to witness a wonder, and it had all started with a simple act of kindness for a strange little chick found deep in the Amazon. The barn door swung wide, and a collective gasp rose from the crowd. Fu stood proudly on a wooden beam, his feathers bursting with color that shimmered under the glare of the news cameras. His intelligent eyes calmly surveyed the crowd, showing no fear in the face of all the noise and flashing lights. "It's true," someone in the crowd whispered. "It's a Spix's Mao. They're supposed to be extinct in the wild." Joan felt a surge of pride and a pang of sadness. Fu was indeed a Spix's Mao, one of the rarest birds on Earth. The authorities had confirmed it when they arrived earlier that day. Summoned by Joan's phone call, the ornithologist who accompanied them had been nearly speechless with excitement, calling Joan's discovery one of the most important ornithological finds of the century. A stern-looking woman in a crisp uniform stepped forward. "Señor Garcia," she said, her voice rising above the hum of the crowd, "you've done a tremendous service to your country and to conservation. This Mao represents hope for an entire species we believed lost to the wild." Joan nodded, unable to speak past the lump rising in his throat. He knew what had to happen next. Fu would be taken to a specialized breeding and rehabilitation center where experts could prepare him for release into the wild. It was the right thing, but that didn't make it any easier. "You've got a big journey ahead of you, my friend," Joan said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "But I know you'll be okay. You're a survivor, just like me." As the team prepared to transport Fu to his new temporary home, Joan felt a tap on his shoulder. He turned to find himself face to face with a well-dressed man whose sharp eyes sparkled with intelligence and excitement. "Señor Garcia," the man said, extending his hand, "I'm Dr. Rodrigo Santos from the Mao Conservation Institute. What you've done here is nothing short of miraculous. We'd like to offer you a position as a field researcher with our team. Your knowledge of the local forest and your bond with this bird could be invaluable to our efforts." Joan blinked, stunned. Him? A simple farmer, working alongside scientists to help save endangered species? It sounded too good to be true. But when he looked from Dr. Santos to Fu, still perched proudly on his arm, Joan felt something stirred deep inside. A spark of excitement. This was his chance to make a real impact, to ensure birds like Fu had a fighting chance in a world that was growing more dangerous by the day. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the crowd, Joan realized his life had come full circle. The ugly chick he found in the rainforest had become a symbol of hope for an entire species. And in turn, Fu had transformed Joan from a struggling farmer into a guardian of one of the Amazon's most precious treasures. As Fu was gently placed in a specialized transport container, he let out one final melodious trill. To Joan, it sounded like a promise, a quiet assurance that this wasn't goodbye, but the beginning of something new for both of them. With a heart full of hope and a mind brimming with possibility, Joan turned to face his new future. The Amazon had always been his home, but now he would also be its protector. And somewhere out there, Fu and others like him would fly free, their songs echoing the lasting power of compassion and the miracles it can create. As the convoy of vehicles pulled away, their precious cargo safely secured, Joan whispered a quiet thank you to the universe. In saving Fu, he had ultimately saved himself, discovering a purpose and passion he never knew he had. What are your thoughts on Joan's remarkable adventure with Fu the Mao? Share your reflections in the comments below. We hope this tale of kindness and personal growth has inspired you. Stay tuned for more captivating stories like this.